Hi, this is Christian Spletzer with Clockwork Recruiting. We're talking about stage 6 today, the assessment stage of the 8 stages of a successful retained search business. So today we're going to learn about how to conduct the assessment. This is for candidates who have made it past the initial screening and the client wishes to learn more about them. So we're going to talk about creating a meaningful conversation with your candidates so that you can learn more about them in a casual conversation, as well as getting into the really important aspects of their experience and their personality, and then helping the client to come to this decision. This is all in furtherance of your desire to place candidates, the right candidate, as quickly as possible. So again, this is part of our 8 stages. This is stage 6. This is a progressive way to run your business as well as run your projects. The assessment stage follows the outreach, which follows the research and the strategy stage. And we've already got a list of qualified, interested, and available candidates. You've presented them to your client, and your client has said, yes, I would like to learn more about that particular one. The assessment stage is a deeper dive than the initial screening done by the recruiting team on the outreach stage. And we are talking about really getting into screening and assessing the candidate's fit for the role in a much longer interview, usually done by the partner on the search. And then taking that, what you learn from that interview, and presenting it to your client so that they can determine what to do next. Usually, if that assessment goes well, the client is going to meet with that candidate. So it's the culmination of this process. It is the one step removed from the final interviews that the client does with the candidate. And the assessment, though, you want to make sure you do that. You don't just skip that step, because you don't want there to be any surprises for the client once they are sitting down with that candidate. Client interviews should not be about going through and building a history of their experience. Client interviews should be focused primarily on determining if there's good chemistry and a fit. The partner's job is to get into the real details of the work experience, the skills that have been learned and picked up along the way, and how they fit against the client's needs. They're also about the soft skills, the things beyond the job spec that you've learned working with your client, and what the client has voiced is important to them in terms of cultural fit or EQ or along those lines. You don't want the client doing a lot of rigorous history when they're meeting with them, although they might choose to, because that will take away from the, hey, is there a good chemistry fit here for us? Can we see working together productively along the way? By building an assessment report, you are doing that work and allowing them to walk into that meeting prepared to make a decision. So what does the client need to know? These are qualified, interested, and available people. Right from the very beginning, that's a good place to start. So now we need to, as a partner doing the assessment, communicate the observations. When you have a longer time to meet with them, hopefully in person, sometimes by video conferencing, maybe by phone, you are going to be spending a good amount of time, maybe an hour, maybe more, with this person and talking to them. You're looking to what has already been built. You've got the research, you've got the documentation, you've gotten the resume from that candidate. They've told you they're interested and available. Your research team, your outreach team has told you why they're qualified, how they measure up against the hard skills. Now you are doing more of as a partner, your observations of them. How do they respond to questions? Are they direct? Do they take a long time to formulate their thoughts, or can they shoot from the hip? What is it that you're observing as a seasoned recruiter that is going to be good and helpful information to your client for making an assessment. And then you're going to be sharing that with your client. So that provides your client with the information they need to go into the interview prepared, and you also want to make sure you're surfacing any red flags. What came up, and it can range from things like there are gaps in the experience, or there may be some things that they are lacking in terms of the skills required for the role. You want to identify that so the client doesn't identify them. They when they sit down, they want to be aware and apprised. They don't want any surprises. And if it comes up, they'll focus on that one thing, even if it's minor. If they surface it themselves, and that will make the interview go completely sideways. So don't hide anything. Make sure you're digging, double-clicking on anything that comes up in your conversation, so that you can get that to your client ahead of the client interview. And the purpose of the assessment is to really provide a in-depth candidate assessment report. You want to document everything that you discussed, all the salient points, things that your client needs to know. You want to present that to your client ahead of the client interview. And once you've done that, you present it, you give them the documentation, and then you give them the summary. You need to determine whether or not the client wants to move forward. So again, this point can't be made enough. This is all trying to set the client up for success. So everything that you do is trying to surface the pros and cons of each and every candidate, clear up ambiguities, and you are a proxy for your client in this meeting. You're doing that first pass, making sure that you get to the core of the candidate's competencies or deficiencies as it relates to the role, so that they can get into that interview and have a real meaningful discussion. You are also giving your client confidence in this process. If they walk in and the conversation is teed up and they know everything they need to know about this candidate, then they are going in relaxed. They are coming in to see how they feel with the candidate. You've provided an expert insight. You've listened to what the candidate says, and probably more important, what they don't say. You are demonstrating your consultative value in this process, as well as being an advocate for the candidate and the client. And the client gets to go into their interview prepared, and there are no surprises, and they get to sit and be present with that candidate. That's going to give them the ability to make a decision faster. And where the part of the process can really break down is when a candidate or when a client doesn't feel prepared. When they go into interviews and recruiters say, here's a resume, go to an interview, tell us what you think, that's too much work on their part. It requires too much work. They're not recruiters. They're not doing this day in, day out. They need to walk in and do what they do best. Talk about the company, talk about the opportunity, learn from, determine if there's a good opportunity to partner with this candidate. The screening process should be done by the recruiting team, and they should feel like that it has been done not just sufficiently, but very, very well, so that they can go in and really have a good conversation and come away feeling like they know this candidate. It's very tempting to want to get projects done. The goal of any project is to get a great placement. But the focus on placement can often lead to the temptation to say, hey, we're just going to try to get this candidate through because I think it's a good fit. It may not be perfect, but it's going to be good. Don't play salesman. Don't sell too hard to the candidate or to the client. There are really good fits out there. If you're doing this process and you walk through it step by step, you'll find them. If you are skipping steps, you're going to find people that may be close, but not a bullseye. If you do that, it will come up, and it will not be good for you. It will not be good for your client or the candidate. And again, your credibility rests upon your ability to find great candidates. So don't sell too hard. Don't squeeze a square peg into a round hole. So how do we do assessment? Well, you've already done a lot of work. Your team or you yourself, if you're doing the whole thing, you've built a dossier on each and every candidate that you've presented up to this point. So you've got a lot to leverage. You can screen against what's on the spec and what's not. You can look for soft skills. You like the client should be going into this assessment interview with a lot of information. You're going to need to clear some more things up. You're going to need to dig deeper. But you have a lot to work with. You're not going into the conversation cold. Then you want to write it up, and you want to present it to your client with your recommendation. You want to document what your client wants to do, and probably really important, you want to start scheduling those interviews. Just a note about scheduling. Scheduling can extend the life of a project, sometimes ad infinitum. You want to make sure that your client buys in at the very beginning to the interview process. It takes a lot of time. High-powered executives you're recruiting at senior levels, you want to make sure that you are getting space on the calendar. So depending upon what role you're looking for, or depending upon what you think this project will take in terms of time, tell your client, block off time 4, 6, 8 weeks from now, so that when I surface candidates for you to interview, you've got those blocked. They can always remove those calendar blocks, but if you try to start scheduling when you're actually ready to get candidates in there, you're going to find that delays the process 2, 3, 4 weeks. People will go on vacations. You'll not be able to coordinate. Start during, have that conversation during the strategy session on the first meeting. Block those off. That will lessen the time, shorten the time it takes to actually get people in for interviews, which will ultimately shorten the time it takes to place that candidate. So, final write-up. Don't tell your client your solution, explain it. Where are your findings? What process did you take? What informed your final decision? You want to present your assessment in a way that defends your recommendation. You are presenting this as if you were presenting it, to a committee, because you are most times. Make sure your recommendation is pretty solid and can be criticized, can be examined rigorously. You want to be able to defend each and every recommendation that you make, the pros and cons that you make, the assessments. So when you present it, don't just let them read it, because don't let there be any openings for interpretation. Make sure you're very clear with what you are saying, and don't sugarcoat things. So if you are looking, or if you have more questions, you can go to clockworkrecruiting.com. If you're looking for a project management database solution, obviously Clockwork Recruiting can help. Always go to clockworkrecruiting.com if you want to learn some more. Stay tuned for the next stage, which is going to be decision. Thanks.